Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon for another one of our town halls, and this one is going to be on the topic of increasing energy rates, particularly focused on electricity rates, and what we can do about them and what we are doing about them. And we're really lucky to have an expert panel here with us today. And we got lots and lots of questions for this one, over 150 questions. So we're going to get to as many as we can. First, let me just say I hear about this issue all of the time, not least of which from my wife. And we get lots of calls and emails about this topic. And I'm honored to serve as chair of the Energy, Utilities, and Communications Committee during this time to be able to focus on this issue, both our clean energy revolution overall and the issue of rates and affordability. Electricity rates have been rising over the last 10 years. Across the state, they're up 80 to 90%. And here in PG&E territory, we've seen increases of 110%. Over that time. Last year alone, rates were raised multiple times. And this is a community that has been scarred in the past by PG&E. I don't have to remind most of you about the San Bruno explosion that killed 8 people and destroyed 38 homes, damaged 70. And I will continue to hold PG&E accountable so that we can prevent these kinds of tragedies in the future and that we can address this issue of ever increasing rates. We're going to talk about what we've already done and about some of the hearings we've held on this topic because the issues are complex. There is not one silver bullet to deal with rates. And that's why, personally, I've got a number of bills in this area, and throughout my committee, we're seeing lots of bills working on this topic. The first hearing I held as chair was about electricity affordability. We heard from regulators and policy experts, a couple of whom are on with us today, about what is driving these increases, including things like wildfire spending. We have to recognize that one of the big causes of increasing rates is a wildfire spending. We've asked the investor-owned utilities to do a lot of that work, and we have to make sure it's done as efficiently as possible, as we'll discuss. But that is one thing that is in rates and has caused rates to go up. And I think we can have a discussion today about whether that's something that should be in rates going forward. That is one of the things we load into rates that some other states do not. We had questions about other states, including things like public purpose programs and things like that that don't have to be in rates. We talked about in this hearing about the build of transmission distribution infrastructure, as well as the process of that. We got a number of questions we'll get to about why that process is sometimes so cumbersome and slow to do the build out itself, which of course contributes to rates as well as opaque rate cases. We are constantly weighing how we can balance managing supply of energy sources with demand across the state, particularly during heat waves, meeting clean energy goals, and also making sure our grid is safe and reliable and resilient to the impacts of climate change. All this at the same time as working to bring down costs. We will discuss some solutions today, including what Politico called my 161-page opus, and Politico said that would transform the way utilities finance wildfire mitigation, as they're referred to, and transmission and discourage rate increases. That is SB 254, and we may have some discussion of that. I do want to say, we'll have a lot of bashing, shall we say, of PG&E today. I do want to say I'm encouraged by some things from the new leadership, and including the commitment to not raise rates this year, and signaling that things are starting now to actually to move down. So we're kind of encouraged by some of that work, some of the work on wildfire, and some of those things we will discuss here today. One challenge and opportunity I do want to call out that we have in California is that really only a handful of hours a year, about 40 hours a year, that the grid is under serious strain. Most of the rest of the time, we're using on average about 50% of the grid's capacity. And so we have a couple things we can do for those 40 hours. Right now is what we do. We continue to build infrastructure to meet that. But we have two other things we can do. Number one is we can do what we call shave the peak, use a sophisticated way of what we call load flexibility to take load off the grid during that time. You might all remember a couple years ago, we had a really intense heat wave, and the governor texted out, said, please not use it, stop using energy at this moment. And that worked, but we know we can't rely on that on a regular basis. So a really sophisticated way of doing that on a more planned basis, number one. The other thing we can do is to have a grid that is bigger than the weather, than any one weather pattern, so that when we have one of these heat waves, we can get geothermal from the south trading with our neighbors. We can get wind and solar from Nevada trading with our neighbors. We can get hydro and other power coming from the north. So that bill particularly that's called SB 540, around a regional grid. And the other one is called 541, which is about shaving the peak and that load of flexibility. And I want to say, by the way, the load flexibility is really only possible because of a lot of technologies and just actually new approaches that come out of our district, either companies or even nonprofits, folks like Tom Cabot and the Menlo Park Energy Commission coming up with ideas for ways that we don't have to, say, upgrade our homes if we want to, say, buy an EV and spend the $10,000, of things that we can do to avoid those costly upgrades, things that are coming out of our district. So with that, I want to get to our panel, and we're going to start out with Marion Borgeson. Marion is the California Climate and Energy Policy Director at NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. We'll have Matt Friedman later. He's a renewables attorney for Utility Reform Network, and Professor Michael Wara from Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment, where he's Director of Climate and Energy Programs. But first, Marion Borgeson. She specializes in designing and improving policies that achieve significant emissions reductions from buildings, transportation, and the power sector. She has much expertise in renewable energy, market transformation, financing, building electrification, and regulatory policy. And I should note that NRDC, organization, the Natural Resource Defense Council, is one of the co-sponsors of SB 540. I mentioned the regional grid bill. Marion, please, you guys came up, NRDC had a big report recently about the driving factors of energy rates. Please tell us about that and whatever else you want to share.
Great. Thank you so much. And Senator Becker, thank you for your leadership on so many energy and affordability topics. It's been a pleasure to work with you. We're excited to see what we can accomplish this session. So yeah, I would love to just spend a little time talking about the results of what we found when we looked at what has happened to electricity rates, particularly in PG&E's territory. So your guys' utilities mostly, except for Palo Alto. And sort of what happened over the last, since 2018, basically. And I will put a link to the report in the chat in a bit. If you like graphs that show all the different elements that are in rates and what's happened over time, that is there for you in great detail, but I will kind of give you the high level of what happened. Like Senator Becker said, we've had huge rate increases over the last 5-10 years. Since 2018, PG&E's rates have increased 40% above inflation. That's around 27 cents per kilowatt hour in 2018, up to about 38 cents a kilowatt hour in 2024. That's a huge increase. And so we did this report to really say what happened, like what was the drivers of those intense increases, particularly those that are above inflation. So what we did is we basically mapped out all the different parts of what's in rates. There's just the cost of energy itself. There's distribution expenses, sort of the smaller lines that are in our homes and towns. There's transmission that transmits energy across longer distances, and a bunch of other parts that are in there. What was really obvious when you look at the data is that the distribution costs went through the roof in the last 5-6 years. And we actually mapped PG&E's distribution costs, and particularly their operation and management costs, compared to other large IOUs across the US. And you see them tracking inflation and tracking the other utilities pretty closely for quite a while, and then they shoot up around 2018. And that's really when they began spending and being required to spend a ton of money, particularly on wildfire related management. Things like trimming trees, managing the vegetation around power lines. Huge expenses went directly into our rates as a result of that. And in the nearer term, we're also seeing some increasing expenses related to wildfire costs that are capital expenses like undergrounding lines. That accounted for more than half of the increase in rates that we saw. So it's this huge, really sudden increase in rates, largely like, 6 out of 10 cents approximately of that increase was really from these wildfire related expenses. We go into greater detail about some of the other factors that are in there, but that's an important factor that changed in our state and in your territory. So now we're looking at, and the report then goes into like, what are the things we can actually do about this? Unfortunately, and we were, of course, alarmed both because electric rates really matter for adopting technologies like heat pumps and electric vehicles, things that are required for us to be able to get off of fossil fuels. We need to have affordable electricity available so that when people switch, they save money or at least are as good off as they're choosing the cleaner fuel. We cannot have the cleaner fuel be more expensive. And we do know that providing additional electricity through renewables isn't more expensive, but we have so many of these costs loaded into the price per kilowatt hour that we're actually seeing these really perverse incentives to potentially at some point, not yet. I think it's still cost effective to switch to EVs right now, but we don't want to get to the point where that's not the case anymore. So we were extremely alarmed by that. And then also alarmed by the fact that the impacts of climate change, so wildfires, heat, all these sort of climate induced impacts and weather that also increases costs of infrastructure, is actually making it harder to electrify and to get off of fossil fuels. So this sort of negative or positive feedback loop that leads to it being harder and harder to electrify, and then you sort of do all the things that are increasing things like climate change and heat and the fires that we're seeing. That sort of loop is exactly what we don't want to be in. The report goes then into some of the things that we can do to change this dynamic and to reduce rates. And I know Matt and Michael will be going into some of these things in more detail. I'll just say it is a difficult problem to solve very quickly. The things that you can do the fastest to reduce electric rates are to take things out of rates or do things like use state money or money from our climate funds to be able to directly reduce rates. So just basically wiping costs out of what ratepayers are currently paying and putting a discount on the electric rate. Or you can sort of change the way rates are collected so that you have a higher monthly fee, but you're actually paying lower for each kilowatt hour so that when you add a heat pump, you're not seeing huge increased costs. That's kind of it for things you can do very quickly. And then there's a whole set of longer term solutions that are extremely important, some of which are included in SB 254 that can really reduce costs over time. And these are things like better balancing wildfire related risk reduction with how much it costs. So better choosing in a smarter way which wildfire related reduction options that utility has available to it and making sure that you're choosing the most cost effective solutions. Another is finding lower sources of capital for the utilities to use. Another is looking for new rates that are meant for specific purposes. So we're interested in things like EV rates for sort of choosing new electric uses. These might be ones that are for new loads. So looking at rate structures and making sure you're able to electrify the things that we need to electrify. There's a whole range of solutions in there. I think I'll stop there because I know that Matt and Michael have a lot more detail on all these things, and they can fill in some of those details. So I will turn it back to Senator Becker.
Sure. I'll mention, as you said, a couple of those things are in 254, taking things out of rates. We set up a power fund. Something we tried for 3-4 years, especially when we had surpluses. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it done. I think this bill would set up that mechanism to be able to take some of those costs out of rates, although not probably funded this year given the budget situation. But at least we'll have the mechanism set up in the future. Another piece we'll get into. Let's turn it over to Matt Friedman. Matt has been advocating for the cleanest energy, the lowest possible prices for residential customers, a term for 25 years. And someone I've known from his time at Public Citizen in Washington, D.C., for even before that. As renewables attorney specializing in electricity, he handles diverse issues, including renewable energy, utility rate making, distributed generation, state legislation, and consumer complaints, which I know there's a lot of those. Please go ahead, Matt.
Thanks very much, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Matt Friedman. I'm a staff attorney with TURN, the Utility Reform Network. TURN represents the interests of residential customers of the major electric, gas, and telecommunications utilities operating throughout California. And for over 50 years, we have been fighting for lower bills and rates to hold utilities accountable and to protect consumers. Our advocacy includes strong support for affordability measures, along with aggressive decarbonization and clean energy targets in California. So why we're here today, people are angry about their utility bills. The level of anger and frustration has reached an all-time high. For example, recent polling found that 86% of California voters say the cost of living is too high, and 82% are concerned about monthly electric costs. And 74% of voters feel that state regulators like the California Public Utilities Commission just don't do enough to push back on utility rate hikes. And as Senator Becker noted, many legislators are getting more constituent complaints about their utility bills than about any other issue being debated in Sacramento. So people have reached the breaking point. Why have they reached the breaking point? Because of the rate increases in recent years. In the last 5 years, average residential rates for electricity have gone up by 74% for PG&E customers. It's unprecedented. It's well above inflation over that period. PG&E's residential rates are higher than electricity rates in most of the state of Hawaii, a state that has historically held the top spot for the highest national electricity rates. One way to understand the affordability challenge of rising rates is to look at the percentage of customers that are behind on their payments for outstanding bills. So for PG&E, 1/3 of their low-income customers are behind in making their utility bill payments. For customers that are not low income, 1 out of 8 customers are behind. In 2023, PG&E disconnected over 180,000 customers for non-payment. This shows the challenge of affordability that faces residential customers, especially low-income customers who are much more likely to get behind in their payments for outstanding bills. So drivers of recent rate increases, Marian talked about some of them. In a word, the problem is spending. Big increases in spending by PG&E on their grid, and that spending then gets passed right through to customers in the form of rate increases. So with respect to their distribution system, the poles and the wires that go through the neighborhoods, the meters, their distribution rates, which are a portion of their overall rates, are up 80% since 2023. That's right, 80% increase in their distribution rates. And some of this is due to enhancing the grid to deal with electrification and customer growth, but a lot of it is spending to reduce the risk of utility-caused wildfires. That spending currently comprises almost 1/4 of PG&E's total revenues, and there are large new wildfire spending requests currently pending. So spending is the very biggest problem. Other contributing factors include net energy metering. Over 20% of residential customers have rooftop solar and are served under the state's net energy metering tariffs. PG&E rooftop solar customers have increased by 80% in the last 5 years. The problem is that the value of rooftop solar production is a small fraction of the generous compensation provided through the net metering program. And unfortunately, the costs of this mismatch are borne entirely by other customers through higher rates, not by PG&E and its shareholders. According to the latest California Public Utilities Commission report to the state legislature, 14% of a typical PG&E bill represents just the subsidy for this program, not the cost of the program, just the subsidy. What are other problems? Legislatively authorized spending. The legislature has passed bills over the years allowing PG&E to quickly raise rates and to recover wildfire-related spending, and that has led to huge spending and rate increases in recent years. And then a few years ago, the governor made a deal to extend the operations of PG&E's Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. It was loaded with lucrative incentives for PG&E and shareholders. That plant is going to cost about $1.4 billion to operate this year, about $500 million of which represents special incentives for PG&E and its shareholders. So with that in mind, what's the future look like? We would love to say that rates are flat or coming down, and PG&E has declared its intention to hold rates to inflation in the coming years. But their proposal, these commitments are really at odds with what they're actually putting on the table in terms of new spending. The PUC itself says that PG&E's rates are projected to rise by almost 11% per year through 2027. And PG&E continues to propose massive new spending on its distribution and generation assets. In their new rate case filed just last month, PG&E requested an 8% increase in core revenues in 2027 and 6% increases for every year thereafter. That's just a portion of their spending. It doesn't even include most of the wildfire costs. And there are other big uncertainties. The state's wildfire fund that provides backstop liability insurance for big wildfires may be out of money. It may need to be recapitalized. Who's going to pay? Shareholders, ratepayers, or a combination? That's not factored into the rate projections. And then we have the Trump administration canceling potentially federal funding for California, money that's been committed for the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, to support community solar programs, and to support hydrogen hubs. Meanwhile, Congress is poised to dramatically scale back tax credits that have lowered the cost of all types of clean energy developed to serve the California utilities. Recent analysis suggests the loss of these tax credits could cause California electric rates to rise by almost 10% in the coming years. Well, that's the bad news. So what's the good news? What are the options on the table? The good news, there are several major bills in the legislature that could help to bend the curve of future rate increases and reduce outsized utility profits. The first is SB 254, authored by Senator Becker. It's an ambitious and comprehensive bill, and I want to highlight several very important pro-consumer elements of this bill. The first is the bill requires the three major investor-owned utilities to finance $15 billion in capital investments using low-cost, ratepayer-backed bonds rather than high-cost shareholder investments. This mechanism alone could save $7 billion in the first 10 years, resulting in a savings of $4 to $5 a month for a PG&E customer. Is that a game changer? No, but it helps. It's meaningful, and it's a way to save money. Second, tying the reasonableness of utility spending increases to inflation and requiring regulators to apply tougher scrutiny to requests that exceed inflation. The purpose of this is to separately identify the utilities' needs compared to their wants and to apply a higher standard to excessive spending. Third would be establishing a new statewide clean energy infrastructure authority capable of financing and owning new grid infrastructure, including electric transmission. Public ownership of electric transmission using low-cost financing can reduce the long-term costs passed on to ratepayers by more than 50% compared to utility ownership. And the total ratepayer savings from this initiative could amount to over $3 billion per year. The bill also increases the amount of money available to pay for the semi-annual climate credit that PG&E customers get, and it would provide a larger share of those funds to low-income customers. And it also moves the timing of those credits to summer months. It also creates a new program, as Senator Becker pointed out, the Power Program, to channel external funding sources such as state income taxes or cap and trade funds to pay for a wide range of wildfire mitigation and policy costs that would otherwise be collected from ratepayers. There's also an Assembly Bill 825, authored by Assemblymember Petrie Norris, who is Senator Becker's, basically she's the chair of the Assembly Utilities and Energy Committee, so his partner on a lot of these issues. And that bill contains similar elements, $15 billion in bonds, a new public transmission program to support public ownership and financing. And the good news that both of these bills are considered leadership bills. That means they have the support of the legislative leaders in both houses, and that support will be critical to bringing these bills across the finish line later this year. The major challenge may end up being persuading the governor to endorse bold actions to bring down electric rates. And then finally, we're also supporting a range of other bills that remain in play. SB 24 that would limit utility shutoffs, and AB 1167, a bill that would prohibit ratepayer money from being spent by utilities for lobbying and advertising. So there's many other options on the table. Those are the bills in play. The key to getting better outcomes from our elected officials and our regulators is to keep up the public pressure, stay involved, aware, and keep contacting your elected officials and urge them to prioritize affordability over utility profits.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you for mentioning a number of the elements of 254. I'm sure we'll probably come back to a few of those, but let me for now turn it over to Michael Awara. Michael is the Senior Director for Policy of the Sustainability Accelerator at the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. and Director of Climate and Energy Policy Programs at the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment, which provides fact-based, bipartisan, technical, and legal assistance to policymakers engaged in development of novel climate and energy law and regulation, and is a and provides that to our California State Senate. Hello, Michael.
Senator Becker, thanks for having me on today. And I'd say I love working with you and your team, as well as and it's an honor to be on a panel with Marian Borgeson and Matt Friedman, from whom I have learned so much about the challenge of getting to clean energy in California in a way that's affordable and safe. And I think that's what we can all agree on. We need safe power, and it needs to be affordable. And we are not going to surrender our clean energy objectives and the idea that we should move toward an electric system and an energy system that doesn't harm people or the climate. That challenge has obviously gotten much more complex over the last 10 years as the wildfire problem driven by climate change has really accelerated in California. Talk to any firefighter, doesn't matter if they voted for Trump or Harris or somebody else, they will tell you that fires they fight today are fundamentally different than the fires that they experienced in the early part of their career. And unfortunately, electric utilities in California have been a big part of that. As we all know, right? The Napa Sonoma firestorm and the Thomas Fire really kicked off this era in 2017, followed by Camp and Woolsey. And that problem has spread to other states like Hawaii and the Lahaina fires, the Marshall Fire in Colorado that burned several thousand homes in Searsville and Louisville. So this is a challenge that many states are confronting. I think what I'd say is that the challenges to affordability that are articulated in SB 254 and the companion or parallel legislation that's in the assembly that came out of the assembly, I think are important steps forward. But we have to recognize that the fundamental issue is that wildfire is a growing problem for the state of California. I imagine that there are some of your constituents that are not just upset on this webinar, that are not just upset about their electricity bill, but also maybe about their insurance bill or their access to insurance because they happen to live in a part of San Mateo County that has high fire risk. I think these are related challenges, and the thing we need to manage as a society, right? And this is why I'm raising this kind of all of society issue is that the approach that we've taken in California, the reason that distribution rates and wildfire costs have gone up so steeply in California is that we have relied very heavily on electric utilities to solve our wildfire problem. Just to put this in perspective, utilities collectively, the three large investor-owned utilities, so PG&E, Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric, spend on the order of $7 billion per year on wildfire mitigation related investments and expenses. The state of California, in its good years, the good budget years of the last few years, managed to spend $500 million on wildfire-related risk reduction. And of course, much more money funding CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE is one of the most well-resourced firefighting agencies in the state, and I wouldn't have it any other way. In the country, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But we have relied heavily, we have thought of the wildfire problem as primarily a utility problem. I'll be the first to tell you that it is, and it was. A significant share of the problem does come from electric utilities. But as we saw in Southern California in January, it's not all about electric utilities. One of the fires in Southern California may have been caused by an electric utility. We're not quite sure yet. The investigation is still underway. The other fire was almost certainly caused by rekindling of a fireworks-related fire that occurred on New Year's Eve. So probably some teenagers playing with fireworks. Fire department showed up, put out the fire. A few days later, the wind picks up, and you have the Palisades fire destroying thousands of homes in Pacific Palisades. I think that the challenge for us in maintaining affordable electric power in California really does relate to our heavy reliance on utilities as a solution provider. Unfortunately, well, it's good in many respects. Utilities are very careful. They require very skilled and expensive labor to do the kinds of capital upgrades that are necessary in the distribution system, both to create safety and also to create, provide the services that we expect from them. And they didn't do their job. leading up to 2017. PG&E probably most of all. Um, what we've seen over the last several years is probably an overcorrection, where the utilities are kind of have been spending in a sort of whatever it takes mode in order to avoid liabilities like the ones that led PG&E into bankruptcy. And so the question is, how do we find balance? How do we balance the need to have a safe and reliable electric system with our need to have safety from wildfires in all other contexts? And recognize that the two are to some degree substitutes for each other, that if you have a well-prepared community for wildfire in general, if there is a utility ignition within that community because, say, a tree brushes a distribution line and ignites, some debris on the ground, if the community is well prepared, the fire department can show up and put the fire out. If the community is not well prepared and it's a windy day, that ignition could turn into a catastrophe. And so I guess where I come to on this is I think that the big solutions to wildfire and as a driver of costs in electricity rates actually may have to come from non-utility places that we all, as community members, and I've been honored to work with San Mateo County in a number of respects, and the CAL FIRE unit that serves the unincorporated parts of San Mateo County. We all need to be doubling down on making sure that our homes and our gardens are safe from wildfire, not just because then our house won't burn down. And I think that's an important fact and the first and best reason to do it, but also because that is going to, if we can all do it together, and if the state can lend a hand to those who cannot afford to do the things that they need to be done, that's going to make our communities safer. And that in turn is going to mean that our electricity rates are stabilized and our insurance costs are stabilized. And the value of that, I would sort of you would certainly put a dollar value on it, but I'll tell you, I have many friends that are from Santa Rosa and a few that ran for their lives during the Tubbs fire in 2017, literally with their kids in their pajamas. And wildfire is not just about money. It's not just about electric affordability, although I think it definitely is. But it's also about avoiding that kind of trauma. And I very much hope that we can find a better balance in California so that when days like January 7th happen and there are perhaps some utility ignitions, also perhaps some ignitions for other reasons, that we avoid the kinds of outcomes that we saw that were so just horrific in LA this year. I'll stop there and just say I'm honored to be a part of this conversation and happy to engage with Senator Becker and the other panelists in Q&A.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. We can bring everyone back. We have a lot of questions, and we'll try to kind of get through them pretty quickly. But thank you, Michael, for your work on wildfire, particularly. As you know, we did a previous town hall on home hardening, and have another bill this year, 326, that's really about the wildfire strategy. But we're also looking at, as you know, working with you to how do we make that bill even more stronger on the home hardening part and make sure that we're getting to the business of home hardening in our communities. So I appreciate that. Oh, sorry, I may have been on mute. Was I on mute?
No, you were good.
Okay, but you can hear me now. Okay. Unclear what's happening with this microphone. Anyway, so we'll go through certain things. So yeah, just acknowledging that piece that you talked about. I went through about 25 Q&A in the Q&A right now, and I answered a few of them. So feel free to, any of you can go into the Q&A and answer any ones that you think. So let's see. So we'll start out. Peter asks, what advantages would permitting reform create in bringing down energy costs? It takes so long to approve new energy and transmission projects. Again, we address, so part of 254 is about streamlining the process, including something that's called a programmatic EIR. So rather than every clean energy project having to do its own EIR, we can do a programmatic EIR in a region. And there's other pieces in that bill that get to streamlining, and there's a number of bills coming out of the assembly to do some of that streamlining, because it is true that those the length of time it takes to get those projects done does contribute to costs. Anyone have a quick thought on that? Okay, we'll move on. I think
Senator, I'll just say that
Yeah.
the time it takes to build, particularly transmission projects in the state, high voltage transmission lines, it can take a decade or more for a project to come to fruition. And these delays have led to problems with new generating projects, clean generation, wind and solar projects, along with others, being able to interconnect into the transmission system. If the transmission capacity isn't there, these projects can't get built. And if they can't get built, it makes it harder for us to make progress towards our decarbonization goals. This is a real challenge. And so I think there's always a balance that's required between ensuring there's good public participation and environmental review, but we need to be able to speed up the pace at which we get these projects built. Otherwise, we're not going to meet our goals, and it's going to cost more money, and those costs are going to be passed through to ratepayers.
Yeah. And there was a question about the cost of utility scale solar. Do you have those stats about the price of utility scale solar, say versus other forms?
Well, I think certainly, the cost of utility scale solar, and by that we're probably looking at projects that are in the range of 100 megawatts or more. I mean, those are prices that, if this means much to your audience here, in the range of probably 4 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour would be the price that you'd end up paying for those projects, although that may very soon change. The tax bill going through Congress appears ready to repeal and sunset the federal investment tax credit that provides huge incentives for these projects. Those incentives are then passed through in the form of lower prices when the utilities and community choice aggregators buy the power, and then that lowers the impact on rates. So solar has been an increasingly great deal for ratepayers. And the question that we now have is, how do we balance out the time profile of the solar production with the actual needs of the grid? We're getting a lot of solar production in the middle of the day, when we increasingly don't need more power in the middle of the day. So when do we need it? We need it in the early evening and the late afternoon. How do we get it from the middle of the day to the early evening? With storage. Energy storage and batteries. And I think there's just a greater recognition of having to pair solar with battery storage to provide maximum value to the system.
Yeah. It is probably worth addressing that. We got a number of questions. Jochen just asked, during the day, California's powered by very low cost solar and wind. Why do we pay an arm and leg for electricity? Marcia wonders, why are higher time of use rates in effect between 4 and 9 p.m.? And also kind of, especially, why is that year round? And so, what you said, Matt, is true. We have so much solar during the day that another electron during the day is not worth that much. And that is why what you've seen is the less incentives for rooftop solar, unless it's paired with storage. So I've been a huge supporter of solar. I had the only bill. I protected the folks who are on, who had net energy meeting previous contracts. And I had the only bill that made it to the governor's desk last year to actually kind of roll back some of the changes that the governor made, particularly for multifamily and schools, where I think we went too far along those lines. But to your point, we do want to pair solar with storage, and that is the priority now. And I do want to say that since Gavin Newsom became governor, we've built 13 gigawatts of storage. So before that, we had almost zero battery storage. We've almost 13 gigawatts now. And that's great. That helps us. But the reality is the peak is still now 4 to 9 p.m. The peak used to be during the day, but now that peak is 4 to 9 p.m. When the sun is starting to go down, especially in the winter, people are coming home, they're plugging in their cars. We got to get everyone to change their settings so they charge at night. We're trying to incent that as well. But people come home and they're using more electricity when they get home, and that is the peak. And that's why a lot of my previous legislation has been, and I've had 9 climate bills previously passed and signed by the governor. A lot of my previous bills have been around 24/7 clean energy because we have to address that 4 to 9 p.m. peak. So I think the question is, it's not rooftop solar or other things. We do want rooftop solar in paired with storage, but we have to do things that really address that peak, whether that's going to be, again, more short-term or eventually longer-term storage, battery storage, or things like geothermal, or eventually offshore wind, which is perfectly inversely correlated with our onshore wind, that would address that peak time. Okay, moving on. Robert wants to know why rates in California are so much higher than other states. Can we learn from them, or are they doing something we could be doing? I think that partly goes to some of the things we've talked about, wildfire costs, et cetera. But does any of you want to take that question? Why are rates so much higher than other states?
I think I can just offer that, yeah, it's been an enormous amount of spending on the grid. We've had all these climate-related disasters in California, and the response by policymakers has been, and another thing to understand is that California has kind of a unique doctrine. It's called inverse condemnation. These words sound kind of strange. What does it mean? It means that any wildfire caused by a utility transmission or distribution line, any wildfire, is the liability of the utility. They have to pay the cost of that wildfire. Now, you might say, well, isn't that normal around the country? And the answer is no, it's not normal, actually. What's normal is that the wildfire costs would be borne by the utility only if they were negligent. But in California, you don't have to be negligent. You just have a tree branch blows off in the middle of a windstorm. It travels 100 yards. It hits into a utility line. There's a fire that gets caused. The utility is liable. And so because of this policy in California, there has been a drive to have the utilities spend nearly infinite money to reduce their fire risk to zero. Michael Wara has spent a lot of time talking about this. And so that incentive to spend as much money as possible has had huge consequences on customer rates. And that's why we've seen such a big upward tick in rates just in the last 5 years.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to comment?
I just second what Matt said. I mean, I think the response of the utilities in California has been to spend whatever it takes to avoid the last ignition. And that is an expensive proposition because just to take, I may get these numbers not quite right, but I believe that PG&E has something like 100,000 miles of distribution lines. So
it's enough to circumnavigate the globe, is what I've been told.
It's a lot of mileage in the presence of tall trees, right? I mean, one of the lovely things about living in California is that we have such a beautiful landscape. But if all of a sudden that landscape becomes highly flammable and you have uninsulated wires at 40 feet and the trees are 150 feet tall, that's a really significant challenge to manage. This is not to defend all the actions of that utility, but just to say that managing the problem is not simple. And one approach that PG&E has taken and other utilities around the state is to invest a lot of capital in kind of hardening the grid. Other utilities across the West are taking different approaches. Some of that, but also a willingness to compromise reliability on the high-risk circuits in order to create safety. And that's something that folks in Northern California have definitely experienced. We all remember the 2019 power shutoffs where we were out for several days, many of us. But I think that may be like the final solution in many states in order to avoid some of these costs. Whereas in California, we've said, or the utilities have said, no, we actually want to have the same reliability in, parts of rural California that are high risk that we have in downtown Palo Alto. And that's expensive given the wildfire risk. And so I think there is a question about like, how do we trade off cost versus, or sorry, safety versus reliability, and cost. And I think we need to be asking that question out loud. The PUC the Office of Electric Infrastructure Safety is as well. But maybe we need to do better on that and think about the cost implications for the people that don't live in the high wildfire risk areas as much as we do the reliability, the electric power reliability for the folks that do live in the high risk areas.
Thank you. Thank you. A couple of things. A number of people brought up the PUC, and Matt brought that up, a lot of anger at the Public Utilities Commission. I will say we have a number of bills this year that look at reforming the Public Utilities Commission, and in some cases, taking away other responsibilities like broadband infrastructure, where I personally don't think they're doing a very good job of, and taking that out of their remit, letting them focus on this issue. And 254, as Matt mentioned, does require that utilities submit one rate case, at least one rate case that is below the cost of inflation. Will give the PUC more tools to push back. There's also a part about transparency into the rate making, and there's another part of 254 which is very specifically about they have to provide any explanation for rate increases, which currently does not happen. So a few things there on the PUC, and happy to discuss more of that. Let's see. Other questions are, well, a lot of people were asking how can they reduce their own bills? And I think some people were looking for this. This has really been about what we're doing at a state level and what can we do from a policy perspective to reduce bills. And again, some of this is short term, but a lot of this is going to be in the medium and longer term. In the short term, one thing that Matt brought up and Michael brought up is the climate credit. So we have as you know, we have a cap and trade system. Rather than a carbon tax, we have a cap and trade system. And in cap and trade, we generate money, generally between $4 and $5 billion a year from selling credits. Right now, we're working on reauthorizing. What is that policy? What does that the cap and trade system look like going forward? So we're doing many big things this year. But that generates revenue, and that revenue then can be spent in various ways. And so one thing this bill would do will increase the money going to the climate credit, and that climate credit does go directly to consumers and to customers of the IOUs and the CCAs. And we want to, again, right now, that credit goes in April, and the bills are probably the lowest. So we're going to reorient that to go in the summer. And if you think your bills are high here in my district, just think about the Central Valley. People, massive, electric, it's 100 degrees all day and sometimes all night in those areas, and it's literally a matter of life and death, and the keep the air conditioning on, and it's really quite high. Number one, moving again to replace gas furnaces with heat pumps, because heat pumps are two ways. Despite the name heat pump, terrible marketing, you actually get air conditioning with that. And we did that in my home because we didn't need air conditioning when I moved here 30 years ago. And then we had a one wall unit, and then two wall units, and then eventually now we have a heat pump, so we have home air conditioning. But you can imagine what it's like in the bills in those areas, people who by and large have less means than folks here. And so that credit would go again to everybody, but in that August timeframe when bills are often the highest, is a piece of that bill. Let's see. Gail wants to know what more can we do to address climate change and reduce energy costs. We'll probably have a follow-up for those who know that is my passion, fighting climate change, and again, I feel very privileged to have this position in the Energy Utilities and Communications Committee. And we try to have a very comprehensive approach, so looking at all areas of emissions for the state and have policy to address each one of those. I'm not going to address that right here, but probably around the time of COP coming up in the fall, we'll have another session on that to look at holistically what are we doing on climate change. A bunch of questions: are utilities rewarded more for spending our money inefficiently or efficiently? Again, we want to incent them the right way, and we have a number of means to do that, and 254 does that. They're also built this year on performance-based rate making that we can talk about. But again, in terms of people reducing their own energy bills, I do want to let people know people may be eligible for the CARE or FARA program. These are programs that provide discounts to people who are low income. Somebody wrote in about their mother on Social Security, and she may be eligible. So you can go to www.pge.com/care, and that'll provide you information about the CARE, California Alternate Rates for Energy program. So that's specifically, you can also call the customer service line to learn more about that program, and the FERA program, which is the Family Electric Rate Assistance Program, to see if you may qualify. And there's, yeah, anyway, so that's one thing. But otherwise, what do you think, what do you recommend to people when they say, hey, how can I reduce my energy bills? And it is important, even for myself, also to remember, we also have to look at total cost of energy, right? If you have electric vehicles, that amount is now coming up in your energy bill. You don't think about it when you're filling up necessarily every time, but now that money is coming through your PG&E bill, and you see it all in one lump sum, which is quite distressing, as well as the true up that you get for solar, which I also get, which is also quite, it seems really out of whack. But let me turn over to Marian, to you first.
Yeah, just some really specific things. When your power is 40 cents a kilowatt hour on average, or 65 cents in the peak, energy efficiency actually makes a ton of sense. So that is still like an old standard. It's been around forever, but checking out options for appliances when you buy them, thinking about home insulation, wall insulation. If you don't have insulation in your home, you really should. If you have any heating or cooling going on there, light bulbs, like all the standard stuff, the products are available, but being really careful about which things you choose still does make a huge difference. If you have an EV or a heat pump, making sure you're on the correct rate. This is something that happens all the time, where especially EV customers who, they're avoiding gasoline, but they're not then thinking much about the price they're paying on electricity. You need to make sure you're on the EV rate. There's a heat pump rate as well, or a rate that if you've electrified your heating, that you can actually have a lower rate. You get some more cheap kilowatt hours available to you. I had to call and do that for our home. You have to make that call. You have to make sure you get on that correct rate. Avoiding electrical upgrades that you don't actually need. A lot of times, if you talk to an electrician, they'll just tell you to upgrade your service, get a new panel. That can cost $5,000 or more. There's new technologies where you can switch between different electric loads. For example, switch between your EV and if you have an electric, a clothes dryer or other loads. There's many cases in which you do not need to upgrade your panel or upgrade your service line, which sometimes can cost money too, that you can avoid. If you are thinking about replacing your air conditioning unit or know anyone who is, you should get a heat pump instead of an AC unit. As Senator Becker said, it is just a reversing valve that allows you to both heat and cool. You can even keep your gas furnace in place if you want to do that. But that opportunity only comes around every 10 to 15 years when you need to replace your air conditioning unit or replace your furnace. You need to make sure you're getting the thing that's really going to be what you want for the next 10 years. That's a huge opportunity. And I'd also say, we've talked a bit about solar here. There is still net energy metering for solar. I think sometimes it's talked about like there's no value to getting solar anymore, but you're actually getting value if you have solar on your roof and you get it today. You can still like have a net energy metering if you're using it when you're consuming it, or if you are selling it back, it's just more valuable if you use batteries to shift it to the evening. So solar plus storage, and having storage as well with that is a really important part of getting that value, and also making sure that other folks on the grid are not paying for using the grid itself as your own battery. It's a really great option for people to do that. And I think most solar systems are going into place now with batteries. So it's a package deal that's usually offered.
Yeah, and I will mention, and I see Michael's his hand up. Thanks, that was great. We'll try to get that out to people as well. We do want to make sure people get compensated for this demand response, this load flexibility, and that's what we're working towards with this bill 540 right now. Right now, there's services like Connect. You can sign up and you get various points and benefits, but we really want to make sure we talk about aligning the incentives. I mean, that's kind of a theme that's been in the questions, and I think that's a theme for all of us here today. We want to make sure the incentives are aligned. The incentives are aligned for a PG&E to do the right thing, and the incentives are aligned for our constituents, for all of you to do the right thing for home hardening. Again, I had a bill last year. We want to make sure that if your community does the home hardening, that you get benefit in your insurance rates. We want to make sure that if you do the right thing in terms of the things we run an EV and electrification, that we sign you up for the right rates, and that you're getting you're getting a real proper discount for doing that. So anyway, a couple things. Michael, go ahead.
Um, I raised my hand, and then Marion, as usual, beat me to the punch. I was just going to say I think batteries are really important. I guess the one additional point I'd make is that the net metering, or the net billing tariff, which is NEM 3, I guess, depending on who you talk to, they call it different things. The current compensation for solar was put in place really before a lot of the run up in electricity rates that's occurred. And particularly when paired with batteries, it is a hedge against future rate increases. Now, I think probably most of us on this call would say the system needs to evolve further. We need to make sure that people are paying for the full cost of the grid that they use, not transferring that cost onto somebody else who maybe lives in an apartment and can't get rooftop solar as a result, or a renter. There is further, and especially in terms of the evolution of electricity rates, that we need better price signals for people so that they can take advantage of these technologies in a way that allows them to, if they're generating power and selling it back to the grid, selling it back to the grid at the time when the grid really needs it and not when the grid doesn't. Um, and that's an evolution. It's a path we need to continue to walk down as a state. But I just would say, thinking about the trajectory that we're on, these kinds of the investments in efficiency just make more and more sense. And if they make sense today, given what Matt just said, it may make sense to do them and be thinking about tomorrow too. And that's going to benefit everyone, because then the system as a whole doesn't need to be quite as big as it might be otherwise. And that we get enormous benefits from that today because of the investments the state has made over decades. Our peaks, the size of the electric system we have is much smaller than it would otherwise need to be. And so we just need to keep walking down that path, maintain that momentum, even in the face of a federal administration that's really not supportive of these efforts.
Yeah, we should mention that. And I do, because people get so depressed when I talk to them about what's happening at the federal government level, especially with regard to clean energy. We do control our own future in large degree. And so, I'm committed, and I'm going to make sure we keep pursuing and keep leading the clean energy revolution. Again, and you mentioned appliances. The President Trump's getting rid of the Energy Star program, which has been an incredible boon to consumers, to buy energy efficient appliances. Well, again, in California, we can still reinforce that. Somebody asked, I'll do a quick lightning round, a few things quickly. Someone asked, what can cities and city sustainability committees do? So again, cities now, and we can lead, right? The state, I learned from innovative efforts of the cities. I passed policies that then help cities, but really cities can help all their residents learn about these programs and adopt these programs, right? Adopt a heat pump, adopt an EV, and learn about the time of use pricing. All these things that we want, to encourage folks now to do, to not have to upgrade their panel. Well, we can talk more. Tell my office, we can help you with that as well. We number things. There's a number of things in the Q&A about SB 540. Just to be very clear on that, for people who care about it, SB 540 does not increase our exposure to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Marion's nodding her head there. Sponsored by NRDC and Environmental Defense Fund, along with the IBEW and many others, supported by Union of Concerned Scientists, supported by environmental voters. They're the ones who came to me and asked me to do this bill, supported by Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy. It's estimated, CC just said it'll save about $1 billion a year. We need to be able to trade with our partners during those peaks. Does not increase our exposure to FERC at all. We're already exposed to FERC. Does not increase our exposure there, and happy to talk more about that. A number of folks were interested in 254. Matt talked a bunch about it. I didn't get to go into all the details, but really we encourage you to take a look and contact our office if you have any questions about that. And we had some discussion of rooftop solar. Again, you heard my commitment to protecting rooftop solar, but making sure, again, going forward, we do want to pair that with storage, and we talked about that in a variety of ways. Holding PG&E accountable. I've done that since my very first hearing. We can get you a copy of that very first hearing that we did, and we'll continue to do that going forward, both through legislation and in the oversight position that we have. I want to thank all of you. I'll give you each a closing word if you would like. And let's start with Marion.
Closing word. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's
Are you
important.
optimistic? Let's have that. Are you optimistic?
You know,
Everything.
that's a hard question. About the world, I'm not feeling that great today. But I am feeling like I'm grateful to be able to be focused on my work in California, because we can actually continue to move things forward. And I think, the message I have is like, it's not going to be just rooftop solar or just community scale solar or just large scale solar period. We're going to need to do all those things in the right way, so that we don't have to build more gas, so that we can shut down existing gas plants, so we don't, I don't know, bring coal back as we're doing in some other parts of the state, inspired and required by
other parts of the country. Other parts
the rest
of the country.
Sorry, rest of the country. I'm so sorry. Yes. So we have a very positive place to work here. Relatively speaking, we are a massive economy, and the things that we do in California matter for the rest of the world. So we need to focus, and this is why I love working with Senator Becker and others on this call. Like, we need to focus on getting this stuff right here, and that will change and ripple out across the world. And so I am positive about that.
Yeah, thank you. A reminder that, we spend over $1 billion a year just to keep a few highly polluting natural gas peaker plants ready for those 40 hours a year. Another reason that we need something like 540. Michael, go ahead, and then we'll give Matt the final word.
Sure. I agree with Marion. I'm very optimistic about California and our ability to do great things. Ultimately, if we get it right in California, this is a pilot at the scale of 40 million people that the world can copy. They maybe won't do it exactly our way. They'll do, things in contexts that are different than ours. But I think the key thing that we need to move forward is a vision for the future, and that your leadership, Senator Becker, I would argue, is really contributing to the careful work that you do in the legislature, to advance a future where people don't have to live with air pollution caused by power plants and other industrial sources, and they can still have reliable access to energy resources that are affordable. And I think we can do that, and we're on the path, and we need to maintain momentum in the present moment.
Thank you. We are the 4th largest economy in the world if we were our own country, which maybe we'll be someday. No, I'm kidding. Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Well, I'll be a little bit less optimistic here because that's my nature. We got big problems in California with respect to meeting our decarbonization goals and doing so in a manner that's affordable and that doesn't break the budgets of average customers across the state. People are really suffering. And unfortunately, there is no silver bullet, as Marion said. There's no one policy initiative where we can wave a magic wand and suddenly rates go down by 50%. It's going to require many different policies, and it's going to require sustained work by a wide range of organizations, by the legislature, and by regulators over time to bring those rates down. I guess what gives me hope is that we're seeing more aggressive policy making coming out of Sacramento this year than we have in a long time. Historically, it's been challenged to get the legislature to do a lot of heavy lifting and take on the utilities. Utilities are very powerful in the legislature, but I'm very appreciative that Senator Becker and other leaders in the legislature have decided to take a stand this year and do some very big things. So we've got an ambitious agenda. And we're hoping that these bills are going to continue to evolve. They're going to get across the finish line, and that the governor will be persuaded to sign them. And that's the first step. We're going to have to come back every year and figure out what we can do to get a handle on these rate increases and to ensure that our commitment to decarbonization is not working at cross purposes with the ability of people to simply afford their monthly bill.
Yeah. Well said. I really appreciate all of you. And I know there are many questions. I'm sure we didn't get to all of them. Feel free to contact my office. I've asked in my office, anyone who wrote in with a question that was very specific to their situation, for my office to get back to you. If you don't hear, please reach out again. But we're trying to get back to everyone as soon as we can. Please do check out the CARE and FARA programs to see if you might be eligible for those, the time of use pricing that Mary mentioned. And the other things, that were on this call, I'm sure will be subject of future things. Because as Matt brought up, it is urgent, and it's not one silver bullet. This is something that we need to do. It's going to take some sustained effort to bring down costs, actually bring more load onto the grid because we have volumetric pricing, get all this EV charging infrastructure connected to the grid, get these things connected to grid, bring down rates through a whole bunch of mechanisms that we talked about today. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you for your time. Thanks to everyone who participated.